Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Gentlemen, how are you this fantastic morning?
Feeling pretty good.
Yeah, good.
Just FYI about this episode, this is a pre-recorded episode. Tommy, once again, is leaving us, so he is hard at work doing the job. So we make him stay up late and do a podcast with us.
Well, I'm just excited to be here, and what a topic today too. So,
oh boy, well, we're walking into this one. This is going to be a let's learn together episode.
You know, it's actually a good thing that we're not doing this in the morning, because it probably would just be dead silence for like 15 minutes while we try to digest what's going on in these articles. So at least the engine's been running all day long.
True.
That I can pick up. I think some of the context of what's being thrown down in the new window functions, but yeah, it's a doozy, man. Like it's very reminiscent. Reading Jeffery Wang's blog articles about this is very reminiscent of Marco and Alberto's stuff on SQL BI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's just, okay, I'm going to reread this paragraph 3 or 4 times, and I might have it then, and then I need to go practice. I need to go play.
So this is topic for today is all around these new announcements. I think is it 5? It's 5 new functions that are appearing in DAX in the December release of Power BI Desktop. So we have 3 functions called index, offset, and window. And then we have 2 helper functions that go along with this one, which is order by and partition by. And so this was announced just recently in the December 2022. This was announced last year in December when this feature came out.
December of last year, so long ago.
Exactly. So let's start off with the easy stuff, right? So let's start with the Microsoft documentation piece. So I'll put all these links inside the description of this video so people have it, so you can look up these articles on your own. Let's talk about what their use cases are, and maybe kind of initially go over what are the windowing functions. Maybe I'll kick it over to Tommy. Tommy, give us kind of a little run around the horn here, or just a brief summary as what we're introducing here.
So just like the name suggests, the window functions in Power BI really focus only on the visual or the context in a current visual based on the row. And every other time that we've really dealt with DAX, we've tried to, really exercise our minds to think of the model. But with window functions, it really is whatever is the order and what's on that particular visual, whether you have that table. And it's basically the ability on the visual itself to either kind of change the index or basically what row you're looking at, but focus rather just on the visual and not on the model that we're so used to.
So I think it's relevant here to kind of note, like, there are 3 kinds of formulas. Like the window function is basically looking at, like, so this is something that this comes from SQL, Seth, right? This is a SQL kind of based concept, right?
These are all right. SQL window functions basically allow you to do summarizations or aggregations on different explicitly defined parameters, right? Or partitions.
Column.
Right? You're almost grouping things and saying in multiple different ways, depending on which function you use. You're saying, this is how I want to group these things together in a context within the whole, as opposed to just doing a group by this, group by that, group by that.
Yep.
And it gets more powerful depending on the use cases, where you can identify patterns in your data that we just didn't have a really easy way to do in DAX, but SQL is supported for a while.
So I want to point out a comment here in the Power BI blog that was just released. 2 statements that are, I think, very telling as to what's going to be happening here. So there's already a number of blogs. I think everyone got excited about these functions. I've seen a number of blogs come around Christmas time. Stuff's been popping up. People are continually talking about this, trying to get their head around it as well, getting in and playing with this. But here's the 2 sentences that I think make sense, or at least allude to what's coming here. It says, as you can see below, the DAX required to perform these calculations is indeed easier than the DAX required without them. So it's adding some layer of simplicity to the DAX calculations. But the next sentence is one that gets me. However, while these functions are very powerful and super flexible, they require a fair amount of complexity to make them work correctly. So it's one of these. So yet again, we're adding more filter context or row level context, whatever the heck we're doing here, context transitions. We're adding another layer to this inside the ability to write more DAX here. So I think in general, I think this is going to be very good. I do think this is going to take a bit of time for people to absorb and figure out the best patterns on how to utilize this.
I'll actually be interested to see if these take off faster than some of the other DAX functions, though, right? Because the challenge, because there's a SQL history here.
That's true.
People are familiar with some of the patterns of how they would use they understand the context between these rows, right? Like it's whereas DAX, it's harder for the person coming with a little SQL knowledge to come in and figure out how you would do cross row calculations, right? Within the DAX calculation itself. And you have the purist, I'm sure, that's yelling at me and saying like, oh yeah, you could totally do this beforehand. It's not a big deal. Being the SQL guy, right?
Yeah.
It very much more intuitive to me to use one of these functions to be like, oh yeah, it totally works. Like I would do a row number partition by, group by, et cetera, in SQL.
So
I don't know. All right, good talk.
Yeah, we're done here.
Well, I mean, this really does. It is still DAX, and it does work in tabular editor, which I was a little worried about since the DAX technically is not part of the model. But one of the things that it's just a drastically different way of thinking. Yeah, for the SQL developers out there, this is. I've seen more than one article where they've been like, thank goodness it's good to have it back because this was something available. We've trained our minds and the way we're trying to evaluate and conceptualize the data model and the numbers that we're showing solely based on evaluation context and the filter context and what the relationships are. And technically speaking, like at least with the window and the offset, that really just focuses on the individual visual. I don't know how that affects the filtering. The examples that I've done or tested out, I have to say I'm pretty impressed in terms of just getting some of the general numbers out there of looking at like rolling average or the current versus the previous period.
Yep.
And I really think, it's not super easy though, and to set up. This is.
I mean, how would you do this normally if you're writing this DAX, right? So you had to kind of where I think this adds some simplicity for me, my mental model of how this would work, right? Every bar on the bar chart has a data point to where it's at, and it knows as what I would have done typically. I would have made a variable. I would have done a selected value. I would have determined what that value was, and then I could then use math to kind of manipulate the filter context to get the calculation that I wanted, right? So to your point, Tommy, a rolling average, yeah, that's one of those windowing functions that you need a window of dates, the last 5 days, the last month, whatever, a rolling average, last 12 months. That's a very common calculation. This makes it a lot easier to kind of get over that hump because it's literally one line of code that gives you that rolling average type piece, which I think is very helpful. Any other examples that you tried, Tommy, ones that you tried that didn't go well?
Yeah, there was actually one. I'm trying to pull it up right now. Which one? It was the window function, but it's basically even though you're like, oh, I don't have to do all that advanced stacks. Well, if I want to do certain like window functions or look at like the rolling average, you have to figure begin to understand a partition within a visual, which just makes things for a new user. I really worry about this, and it's based on the models, based on how you're ordering things, and it's also based on if the columns are in the same table or not. Honestly, though, like from that particular visuals point of view and what that number showed, just to see like the previous period or show the rolling 3 averages. One of the examples, I believe it was Nico. I think that was on LinkedIn. So I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but it was, is the data Mozart. So Nicola, he talks about customer lifetime value. I thought this was really cool, but it's a little worrisome because how does that actually look in a card, and how else would you report on that? And I think, to me, even though there's a lot of use cases for that particular visual, especially if we're doing quick comparisons, this product versus that product, or looking, something that's not necessarily, I don't want to say sensitive data, but that's easy to do. But I think for me, the problem is when it expands into how else are you going to report on that? So let's say the customer lifetime value, like the average days of a customer purchasing. Well, that works super well using the window functions in the table when those columns are there. But that may be a KPI of what's the overall number, right? So I worry about that side of things in terms of where I do have my concerns.
Well, I mean, I think in this case, like if you think about what's on the visual itself, like I think the reason why and I'm looking at Nicola's example here, it appears to me as the nuance here, or the opportunity here, is you can pick the column by which your data is being grouped by, right? The group by statement. So if I did this in SQL, I would say, he's talking about lifetime value, right? I have a list of transactions by customer, right? I want to calculate a total for an entire customer, right? What is their total dollar spend that they've given me over the 7 or 8 transactions each customer has had. The windowing function enables you to say, partition this data by the individual customer. So you can calculate your total sales, sum of sales, whatever that may be. And then you can group by like a text column, which you could do that before, but it's all one line or one statement. I don't know. This is where I get to the point of like, I really need to understand the context of what it's going through here and why it's doing, what is it doing, so I can understand exactly what these functions are working through. Like, I'm not sure I quite understand why the partition pie is there in all these cases, and how his example is explaining that. I think is doing a good job. I just need to spend more time with it, I think.
So it's a good thing that in his first, the ironic thing is we're looking at 3 functions, and it takes 2 entire blogs to describe everything that's going on.
Totally.
But in his first one, let's just walk through that then, right? Because there is how do window functions work?
Yeah, he's got a good example there.
Maybe your question around partitions will be answered, right? So he breaks it down into 5 steps, right? So take all the rows of the table as specified by the table parameter, right? So we're talking about the components of the function. Divide the rows into separate partitions by the unique values of the partition by columns, right? So if you're thinking about like the partition is, you're just choosing,
it's like a summarized by
choosing
kind of
your group by, like partition by these, like what is the uniqueness, and that's defined by your partitions. Third is sort the rows within each partition according to the order by columns and sorting directions, right? A valuable one is like, do you want to sort ascending or descending with your dates, right? If date is part of whatever, alphabetically, or however you want to do things, but the sort order matters.
Yep.
Determine the current partition, and if necessary, the current row within the partition.
See, that's where I'm like, read that again one more time.
Determine the current partition, and if necessary, the current row within the partition. So how is he specifying that though? Like,
so that would be your date ordering, right? So if I have a partition, all the transaction that Michael made, and then I'm on transaction number 2, right? So it's almost like you can indicate, okay, we're ordering by dates, right? Because you could sort dates in descending or ascending order, right? So it's like there's the grouping column, and then there's the sorting column. So then if there's a sort column, then you need to have 2 dimensions that describe the position of that individual row. So
Gotcha.
maybe that's what he's referring to. I'll have to keep chewing on this one.
So then 5 is basically the description of each of the functions do, right? So return 0, one or more rows within the current partition. So offset, return 0 or 1 row at a certain distance from the current row.
That makes sense. I know where I'm at. I'm going up or down. Yep, up or down.
Index returns 0 or 1 row at a fixed position in the current partition. Is that similar to, that'd be like similar to doing like your row number, right? Like if the row number calculation where you're doing partition by, and then you're defining, I always want position number 1 to be returned by, right? Because like a use case I use in SQL all the time prior and now can use pretty easily here, I think, is I have multiple records returned in the same day.
Yes.
Right. I want you to return me the newest or the first or last, right?
Mm-hmm.
Based on a date timestamp or something, right? So you're partitioning by that unique row, whatever it is, getting it down to that subset of the same X number of values, and then you're discarding all of them because you're only going to choose the one row.
Yes.
I think that's what index would be used. So it'd be similar to that, right?
Well, index is an absolute positioning, right? So that's, whatever's in the table, it's an absolute position across the entire thing.
For that partition. So if you were looking at each customer, the absolute position, I believe you can set up as, if you say like basically like the partition's the table or virtual table, that absolute position would be, let's say, the sorting order, the customer's purchase dates, right? So each index would be for each customer their first purchase date. So
window is interesting to me though. Like, and you guys can tell me if I'm dumb here, but window returns all the rows in between a lower bound and an upper bound. Either bound is a row at a certain distance from the current row or at a fixed position in the current partition. Could we use that for?
I mean, that is kind of
like returning limited numbers of values in tables. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's no easy top end sometimes in
that's true.
Dynamically generating, like give me a page through my table, right? Because like Power BI just says exceeded memory resources.
You've killed me. I can't.
I wonder if we could utilize that in some dynamic way where you're keying off of a function that just gives you the top X number in the bound. Like up or lower. I thought about, like, when I hear upper and lower bound, that's where I go with my thought. It's like I've always wanted an easy button in that I want to page through tables, or I don't want to generate the entirety of the data set, because that's obviously not what I want to do in the least performing visual of a Power BI report.
Yes.
But yet that's where I'm going to get that exceeded memory error more often than not.
So in the article, and again, I don't know if you guys are following on this one too, but on the article from Jeffery Wang, talking through it's pbidax.wordpress.com. He does there's an interesting diagram on the syntax of window functions. And if you go to that one, to me this is what the windowing seems to make a lot more sense to me in this one, because as DAX is evaluating a table, there's always this concept of what is the current row, which I think is very interesting here, because this is the filter context piece that we talk about when we teach DAX to people. You have various dimensions and then a measure, right? The measure has the context of the two-dimension columns. In this example, he has customer and dates. So they have the dimension of customer being Alexandria. The date is 11/13/2019. So that, if you're in the context of that row, the relative or absolute positioning with the windowing. So if you're using relative position, he has a good little diagram that says, relatively, if you're -1 relative, you just go up 1 row. If you have, -1 to 2, you would go 2 positions above. And so that defines the window around that single row context. I really like this function though. Like, I feel like the window function seems to me right now way more useful than the absolute positioning for things that I would use in calculations at this point?
Honestly, it's pretty hard to say, and I think that where my question is how much should this be implemented? Because I think it's not difficult to say at all that this is absolutely a valuable feature. I don't know where I'd rank it if this is more impactful than field parameters. And for me, like right off the bat, this is something that I'm going to be looking to do in existing solutions.
I think it's going to be important to understand when to apply this, though.
Right.
So I feel like a field parameter has a very specific use case. Right. I want to switch this calculation from one thing to another on a single visual, and I wanted to select it with like a button. That makes sense. This one I feel is a bit more nuanced. Yes, you could, and the thing is, this is in addition to what you could have already done previously by using DAX patterns, right? So all this is doing is like adding another tool to your library or another tool inside your tool belt that you could use. But again, I don't think I would want to roll out any. Well, let me say it this way. I'm already thinking about a use case in a report that I have right now that needs windowing right now.
Right.
But do I want to roll with that feature right now? Like I may play with it to figure it out if it works, but I'm not sure if I really want to roll out into production this feature right away because I'm not sure if I understand it all the way yet.
So, and I think it can solve it. Yeah. And I think that's the part where I'm looking towards now is they're always going to be more updates. And I think the big thing is this is a quick and easy solution. If I was trying to do something on a bar chart, just to say it's almost like one of those cool, you can now showcase it. But in terms of actually reporting and again, really showcasing and saying these are our numbers.
How long do you wait till you put it in production? That's my question.
Well, why would you hold back on putting in production as long as you validated that your outputs are what you would expect them to be?
That's true.
I mean, it's not like it's a beta feature.
Yes, also true.
Right.
The stuff that scares me is the language of like it's easy to like that's the stuff that scares me though.
Yeah. So and I'm 100% with you on that one, right? Because in the context of my simple mind of how I use SQL window functions, that was within the context of a table.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that doesn't mean that you can't use this calculation in other places or visualizations with Power BI. Like, and immediately my mind just goes, I don't know where or how I would do that. I'd have to go play. Like, is this a bar chart? Is this like showing this value against this value? What doesn't scare the bejesus out of me, but it is certainly like, oh man, we're stepping into that well of depth, right?
Yeah,
is just
exactly.
Scroll down a little bit further in the blog, and nail the header. What if there is no current partition or current row?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And this is where all of the sudden,
like a current,
when
a
they
card,
create new words, right? Where within there, he's like the DAX engine, right? In the previous, so he says, here, let me just read this. In a previous example he showed, we are lucky in that evaluation context happens to have all the columns necessary to identify the current row. This is my thought in the table, right?
Yep.
Like I have
you have all the records. Yes.
But what if some columns are missing? Or worse yet, all columns are absent? DAX expressions must work in all contexts. That's the fundamental reason that measures can be reused in any report. The DAX engine team has implemented a concept. Warning bells. Beep, beep, beep.
Yeah, exactly.
Implemented a concept called apply semantics to window functions so that they not only don't fail when there isn't enough information in the evaluation context to identify a unique partition or row, but they even return meaningful results in common scenarios. The name apply semantics, in quotes, was inspired by the cross-apply operator of T-SQL. Now, like, there's a lot to unpack in there because it's like, hey, one, it's great that like I'm not going to put myself in a position where I create a DAX function and it just blows up my visual. It doesn't work, or like, and I've got to troubleshoot something. But now it will work in in every context. What does that mean? Right? Like now I got to figure out
Yes.
what is this calculation going to do in certain visual representations. And then there's like
That's the edge case stuff.
7 bullets, right, where he just goes
Yes.
down deeper and deeper and deeper into like, here's what we've thought about and this is why it's going to work. And this is the type of stuff that like it's going to take a bit to just chew on and test out, I think, practically.
I'm just reading, and
before I'm like super comfortable using
Yes.
it in all applications.
Correct. And I think if I had a single bar chart and I'm building a model and I'm not expecting people to go consume this after I'm done, yeah, I could probably use a windowing function. Rolling average, here we go. Like I think I can understand that one. But when it starts saying like these applied semantics, and okay, well, what happens if someone takes that measure and tries to put it in an Excel report or on a card or as a fit, like wherever this thing lives? Like I don't know where it's going to be applied.
Right.
So now I'm looking at it going like,
I'm kind of glad this is pre-recorded because I guaranteed you, if Baldini is in watching this right now,
it's so simple.
Off in the chat. maybe at this point it's like, oh, great point, Greg. Yeah, everybody just listen to Greg. He's already digested all this.
Yes, exactly. He understands it. So that's I think that's my hesitation, right? If I haven't like, I don't think I would want to apply something like this into a model unless I really had some good run time on it. And this is probably with any. I mean, this is for these features in DAX. But if you think about like anything new that's coming out, Power BI or ever, you kind of
why would you say you would hesitate to put it in your model? Like in my mind, there are very easy use cases where I could apply this or replace complex solutions that we built either behind the scenes to surface up the data or go through the exercise of like what you were saying, like build out the DAX calculation that's going to go iterate over these things and identify in columns, like especially when you're doing red, yellow, green, right? You want to identify the bad in the good versus like this would be a prime example of like doing that in a table format. Like, so I don't get like, oh, I'd hesitate to use it at all. I would say I'd hesitate to use it outside of where I'm very, very like familiar and I understand that it would work.
Okay, maybe that's what I mean. So maybe that's more of what I'm saying. I wouldn't, if I was going to use it, I would only use it in places where I'm very familiar with the data model. I understand what's going on. I'm not trying to, oh, new feature came out, just rip out this DAX, drop it in, ship it, kind of thing.
Maybe the measure name needs to be like table only _
Yes, exactly. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe but this is why I like learning from the community, right? Because so while I'm learning this, I'm starting to invest my time to figure this out. Jeffrey's blogging about it, Nicola's blogging about it. Like there's other people that are already experimenting with this one. It's the same thing for like calculation groups. I'm trying to remember the gentleman who's done a ton of calculation groups. Bernat. Tons of calculation groups. And he's giving me like a whole bunch more things to think about, like in this calculation group writing experience, where, oh, if you write it this way, you can cover these edge cases that don't calculate the correct thing. Oh, cool. Right. So other people are going to explore this idea and figure out part of the solution. I just feel like I need some more runtime on the learning and seeing what other people do with it and digesting how is the best utilized inside a report.
So I guess, would you probably then agree that this, for the Power BI developer who maybe has been using DAX for a while, or whoever they're at in their journey, would you say this needs to be part of the tool belt? This is not necessarily used, but you should know how to use this. Is this just another thing added to the skill set?
It's probably like another module in your advanced DAX class. That's what I'm thinking, right? I don't think you're going to be like, oh, hey, look, we just learned how to write sums and average X and iterators in DAX. Oh, by the way, we're not going to teach you like windowing functions. I think that may be something that might come out a little bit later after you start understanding filter context. Because there is this concept of like, you have to be able to think about where I am at the row context level, because that row, what row you're in, filter context means a lot to this one.
Okay. I'm gonna back up because I moved on to the second blog article.
Oh no.
So we just talked about apply semantics, right? And like how I didn't even want to get into the steps. So there's a section in here, and no kidding, because SQL BI reached out to Jeffrey, right? There's a header in here, a more accurate description of the apply semantics. So I'm going to read this too, because like,
Okay, this is
one
another
makes
good
more sense probably. If we recall from the last time, apply semantics in quotes,
Yeah.
and he even italicized it now,
Yeah.
as outlined in the section, what if there is no current partition or current row, refers to the way that the DAX engine returns potentially more than one output when there's no clear current row or current partition from the context, right? So we've declared that.
And here's where the answer
Alberto
comes from.
Ferrari from SQL BI team pointed out a flaw in the steps. Rest assured that the outlined steps were not the actual algorithm implemented in the DAX engine, but just an attempt to give users a mental model on how to interpret the results when apply semantics kicks in. Below is a second attempt to explain how apply semantic works, and I am going to go through these 4 because they look much simpler.
Yes, the other one was like 7. I'm getting really nervous going, oh my gosh.
Find all possible rows of columns from table by taking into account the current evaluation context. Example, apply all filters.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Apply the filters first. Yes.
Second, for each row from number 1, locate the current partition and then the current row within the partition. Perform steps 3 and 4.
Okay. So now it's positioning itself in each of the partitions by row.
And then, and current row. So, and then calculate the result row or rows as defined by the semantics of the window function, and output the rows as long as they have not been output already. That's easier for me to digest. I don't like, I'll have to practice and see how it works, right? Without the context of the columns. But at least the words are ingraining in my head. So go into the second blog article, which we have posted as well, to further digest the apply semantics part of the feature. And
if all else fails, you can always have 3 new DAX functions to help you debug it, which is called evaluate and log, 2 CSV, and 2 JSON. This is like a spiraling hole.
My
like,
goodness.
Yeah.
If you didn't think you were a developer before.
I do love, though, that like these are obviously they're more complex table functions, right? That come from SQL. But the cool thing is right after that, they're like the evolution of evaluate and log, right? That just came out. That was a function that allows you to troubleshoot some of this a lot easier. So there's a whole other section within there that like provides examples of how you would determine, which I'm sure we'll all need at some point as we explore further the capabilities of these, what is actually being output in the DAX function in data.
I think I'm just going to wait for Tabular Editor just to automatically add a whole bunch of evaluate and logs all over my functions. There's probably someone's going to write a script that says, hey, I'm going to write a script that's going to go through every formula and wrap it in evaluate and log and then take it away so I can turn it all, turn debugging on, turn debugging off. Just automatically happens. Tommy, there you go. Another script idea for you for TE.
No, I'm not touching this one in terms of with the window functions. I think, I definitely feel this is something that I'm trying to learn. At first, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll kind of like stay away and just kind of read about it. But just again, utilizing some of the examples in a demo data set and just kind of looking at the comparison, I'm impressed. I was pretty impressed in terms of just getting the number quickly. Chris Webb actually just came out with an article too, I think this week, and saying the impact for window functions on direct query. And let me see if I can find that.
I did. Yes. Yeah. I did see that one. And I didn't get a chance to read that one all the way through before the podcast. So I'll have to quickly skim that one.
So that's what I was going to, I think, mention too, right? Like in that second blog article, he does describe the performance of window functions.
Okay, that's true too. So that's an advantage why you'd want to use it, right?
Well, it's not going to be the most performant thing in the world, right? So we've talked about the differences between your formula versus storage engine, right? In terms of compute. So this is all on the formula side, and they're not pushed into the Vertipack engine for import models or folded into SQL for direct query models, right? So these are not going to probably perform very well if you have tens of millions of rows, right? In a table, which they don't in SQL either, right? Because you're fabricating these contexts and grouping by things.
I would agree with that as well, but I don't understand. So what's the gist, Tommy, in Chris's article around for performance for direct query mode? Is it somehow folding up those queries back up in a way that lets you aggregate better? What's the kind of the premise there?
Basically, the idea with the article is it drastically, if you're doing aggregations as well, will drastically reduce trying to do those same comparisons if you were to do that in DAX.
Gotcha. So there's without those windowing functions, the SQL queries that are folding back up to the direct query engine is more verbose.
Would take longer.
So then by using the windowing, you're shortcutting some of that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, a direct query onto a SQL window function. Whew. Yeah. No, I've never. My application is more in import where I would need to identify something. Like that. But like I said, like I know for instance, several places instantly that we could probably test out the feature if we wanted to.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like the value add here is knowing that this is an option in those cases could save you a lot of time in having to adjust your views or your data source to go create those types of interactions. And if you think about it, we're like my whole coming into this conversation was like, oh, SQL all the time, right? But what if you don't have a SQL source, right? Now this is even more powerful because I now have that ability to do that in the report.
Oh, that's true.
Whereas before, I don't even know, can we do this? Is there some sort of functioning where you can do this in Power Query?
Oh, no. I don't think so.
I didn't think so.
I think if you're doing any kind of stuff like
somebody else goes, you guys are idiots. Of course you can. This is how you do it.
Well, where's Alex Powers when you need him? Like, hey, Alex.
Yeah, no. I think
jump in here.
I think you can.
So I think you can, but you have to do like
but it would be like multi-step, multi-column. Like
you need it in a function. I think a function is where that starts applying, right? It gets harder to get row context at the Power Query level to jump up and down in rows there as well. But I know you can do it. I just feel like it's a function-based effort.
I recall, I think Gil in his book had a walkthrough that's like kind of scratching the back of my brain when I was deep in that, and we were talking about that a lot. Where it was pretty in depth, but I think you can like perform something similar, or like I don't know. But this way is much more streamlined and straightforward to do those calculations in the reporting layer now. Now that I think about it, even above and beyond, the value increases when I don't have a source where that's a capability that I have available to me when I'm prepping my data before I send it to Power BI.
It's really interesting what this direct query article is fabricated. So, I mean, what I think Chris is doing in the article here is actually using the offset function through direct query, and he's watching the SQL that is being executed against the server. Right. So in DAX, use the previous statement, do a year-over-year calculation, then do it again using the offset method, and then he's looking at the resulting data table that's coming out of it, and it's substantially simplified compared to what it was previously.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So what is this article about? The argument that using these is faster.
Yes.
Like in Power BI in DAX, and it simplifies the query passed back to SQL.
So
I get it. Okay, so the argument is
so basically he said here's a big table. It has data by date and by year. In the format in the example that he gives, he goes, okay, here's the yearly totals of each of these values. Okay, I want to do a calculate statement that says calculate total sales same period last year. So basically take the dates, roll them up, rip them back out, recalculate it for the same previous period of time. So this year's sales, and then being able to get the prior year version of sales. he then rewrites the same equation, calculate sales amount, and then this time uses the offset function to go back 1 year prior. And when he does that, the resultant table does not produce a SQL query that has every single date with its dollar amount. In this case, it actually takes the context of each year and rolls up by year the calendar year element. And then so instead of having,
you're returning less
365
data. You're
Yeah.
returning less data from the database.
Yes. So this is one example that I love what Chris does, because he goes so deep on a single idea and goes, hey, here's a concept, and walks the example really detailed through and tells you exactly here's what I did, here's how I tested it. This really appeals to my engineering mind in this case. But from the article, it looks like it's a lot around, okay, now that you're, of course, running a query back to the backend server where it's doing 365 rows versus just one row for each year. Yeah, of course, that's going to be faster. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It's
he's going to have
there's a couple interesting aspects of the article, right? Minimizing data being sent back and forth is always a good thing.
Huge.
So it's
especially
rather than provide the details and then do the summarization, right?
Yeah.
In Power BI, it's just here's the summarization that you're asking for.
Correct. Already roll up to the right level.
Yeah, it's cool.
Pretty slick. Well, we've done it again. We've burned through a perfectly good 2 minutes of the entire window functions. I hope you found some value from here, and how we're not going to use it right away, but we're definitely going to start exploring it a bit more. So this was kind of our an interesting episode. We're going to try and digest. We're trying to learn about how this window function works. There's a ton of good articles that have come out, so we'll link to all of those. The initial blog article that Microsoft gave, Nicola's article looking at the windowing function, the 2 articles from Jeffery Wang, and then we'll also throw in here the one from Chris Webb. Again, doing a really good job of kind of getting our head around what does this window function mean, and how do we utilize this, or offset, or the index one as well, so we can kind of get our head around what that's going to look like. I'm cautiously optimistic is what I'll say. Test but verify will be where I kind of land on this one. Excellent. All right, Tommy. I forgot to do the outro. We thank you all very. I got to do the outro now. Oh my goodness, it's been that kind of day. Thank you all very much for listening. We appreciate your listenership. If you found some value from this, if this helped spur some information around DAX windowing functions for you, we would love it if you would share it with somebody else. We really appreciate the positive feedback and sharing with your other individuals across social medias or at work. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere they're available: Apple, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Join the conversation live Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7:30 a.m. Central.
Sounds good. Love it. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.